At the edge of the world, at land's end, there is a headland extending into the sea. At the end of that headland stands a tower. The 9th Tower. Within the tower lies mystery and meaning. Truth and troth. Revelations and realizations. All you need to do is open the door. Welcome to the first installment of Tales from the 9th Tower. My name is Lothar Tuppan, and while I am an audio drama producer and voice actor as well as a prose writer, the first medium I ever told stories in, which is arguably the purest art form for stories, was as an oral storyteller. I'd like to share some of these stories, and while they are obviously recorded, I'll be telling them in as traditional a way as possible during the recording. You see, oral storytelling is different from acting on stage, or in a recording studio, or in front of a camera. And while there are times that a storyteller will memorize a tale word for word as if it were a script, more often than not, we will memorize the story event for event, so we can tailor the tale during the telling to the audience. We maximize what's working. We can lean into things that we weren't expecting but is really resonating, and hey, let's get those laughs or those tears or those shudders, whatever the point of the story is. This doesn't mean that there aren't refrains, specific lines, or other important parts that the teller memorizes. Well, because they're important. So what it does mean, though, is that stories are fluid and can shift with each telling, even with the same teller. And finally, there's no do-overs in oral storytelling, since you're telling in front of a live audience, so I'll be leaving any flubs in the final recording for your listening pleasure. The King of the Cats is the first story that I ever told in a storytelling environment. In 1998, an old friend of mine who's a wonderful storyteller named Norman Isley, he invited me to a storytelling swap that he went to on a regular basis. He knew that I was interested in learning more about the art form and the community. So I went, and really liked it, and after a couple of times I felt comfortable enough telling a story of my own. But not just any story. This is something a bit odd that happened to me when I was 16 years old. And I think you're going to find it a little bit weird too. Now, it's 1985 in San Diego, California. It was the summer before starting my senior year of high school, and I spent most of that summer hanging out with my best friend Eric. He lived in a neighborhood called South Mission Beach, which was a beach community, and that was a much cooler neighborhood than mine, so we pretty much always spent all our time there. The only problem with any beach community in Southern California is that there's never any parking, especially in the summertime. And this community was on a man-made little peninsula, so this little strip with the bay on the east, the ocean on the west, some great homes in the middle, but not a whole lot of parking. And this particular Friday night, where it was warm, beautiful, full moon with no clouds, there was no parking at all. And I think by the time I found a spot, it was at the boardwalk parking lot, about a 15-minute walk to Eric's house. So I'm trying to take a shortcut, and I'm walking down this alleyway and approaching what's kind of like a little crossroads of alleyways coming up. And I see this movement coming up from the south, and it's really low to the ground. I look closer, and I realize it's this group of cats, a large group of cats. I mean, there must have been 50 or 60 of these guys, and they're all coming up and turning towards the east, to the bay side. Now, they were moving in a line, but it wasn't like a single file line. It was more like a procession. And I use that word because up at the front, they were carrying this little tiny coffin on the back of the cats. And on top of the coffin was this little gold crown. Now, as soon as it sank in as to what I was seeing, I just sort of blurted out, "Whoa, dude!" And every single cat stopped. And every single cat turned to look at me. And one by one, every single cat started making that growling, mewling sound, that and I just panicked. I ran flat out to Eric's house. I think I ended up on his doorstep, completely bent over, out of breath, and just banging on the door. "Dude, what's your problem?" I ran. Ran? You? Dude, get in here. So I followed him in. I closed the door, locked the handle, flipped the deadbolt. I even put that useless little chain thing up, and I turned around, and he's looking at me a little concerned now. Dude, what's going on? It's cool. Everything's... Meow! Ah! Eric's cat, Mao, had just walked into the room, and I screamed like a child. Dude, what the hell is going on? So I told him. I told him the whole story, and I felt really stupid because it sounded, well, really crazy to me. But the interesting thing is that Mao looked at me very intently as I told the whole story. He was really interested in whatever it was I had to say. Now, when I finished telling what happened, Eric looked at me as if I was crazy. But before he and I could really say anything, Mao just said, clear as day, "Well, I'll be. Guess that means I'm the king of the cats." And Eric's and my mouth dropped wide open. Mao came over and started rubbing up against Eric's legs. "I'm sorry, my friend. I think I had better go and take up my responsibilities. But thank you for your love and your hospitality. I will always remember you, and will always miss you." And with that, he ran straight into the fireplace, up the chimney, out the house. And Eric and I just stared at each other, not knowing what to say. I think Eric finally broke the silence, saying something like, "What am I going to tell my parents? This sucks!" That was a long, long time ago. Eric and I are still friends, and we still talk about Mao occasionally. I know it's been decades, and that means that Mao has passed on, and there's been other cat monarchs. But I've always wondered what type of king he was, because he was a really cool cat. Now, what's frustrating to me is that when there's no one else around, I'll whisper to my cats and tell them the whole story, and ask them if they've ever heard anything about King Mao. I'm still waiting for them to give me an answer. Now, for those of you who don't want to let the facts get in the way of a good story, at least what I hope was a good story, you can stop listening now. But if you want to know a little bit more about the storytelling tradition of that tale and the associated folklore, at least a little bit of the associated folklore, keep listening. But only if you're the type of person whose sense of wonder and mystery is enhanced by such revelations. Okay? Now, although my history with the story is obviously subjective and certainly not representative of the storytelling community, I think it's interesting nonetheless. See, I heard this story first when I was a kid. I think it was one of my dad's friends, but I'm really not sure. I can barely remember, but I think it's got to be at least one of his friends or colleagues that was telling it. I was under 10 years old, and all I really remember was that the person told it to me in that same personalized, first-person way, and I absolutely loved it. Now, the next time I heard this story, I was a teenager reading the novel Shadowland by Peter Straub. And if I remember right, it's been a while since I read the novel, the story figures in there, and it's got a long history of tellers who have told it all the way back to British and Irish folklore. And each teller tells it in a personalized way and adds to the lineage of successions of the kings of the cats. And that communal legend building I found really intriguing, and that seemed pretty damn special to me. So after I told this story at the swap, one of the storytellers there verified a little of this by saying that it was one of his favorite stories too, and he thought that the conceit of making it a personalized tale, what he called making it similar to a tall tale, was part of the magic. But I'm curious as to whether or not the personalizing of this tale is part of the European traditions, or whether it's just an American twist. I say that because this tale has a long lineage. Not only do many variations of the tale exist in both English and Irish folklore, and where sometimes the cats ride bridled foxes during the procession. I think that one's a really cool one. But throughout the European continent as well, there's a lot of examples of this particular tale. There are Scandinavian versions, where the cats are really trolls just pretending to be cats. And allegedly there's a version that involves werewolves, but I've only read about that on the internet and haven't been able to actually find the story, so I'm dubious about that one. And supposedly the oldest version allegedly involves the death of Pan, the god Pan, and is recorded in Plutarch's Moralia. I think all of this just sort of goes to show that there are, and always have been, many strange kingdoms of cats, trolls, and even otter creatures. And maybe someday, you'll see just in the corner of your eye a funeral procession. And maybe those cats will really be cats. Or maybe they're just trolls pretending, trying to survive in the cracks of our urban human society. Maybe they'll be riding foxes. Only you'll be able to say for sure. Thanks. Hail the stories, and as storytellers have known since the very beginning, hail the listeners. Tales from the Ninth Tower, number 1, The King of the Cats. Story arrangement and performance by Lothar Tuppan. Sound effects from the Free Sound Project. Music by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech. Sound design and mastering by Lothar Tuppan. This presentation is copyright 2023 to Lothar Tuppan, and this recording is released under a Creative Commons 3.0 Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. All other rights are reserved. The Ninth Tower Productions.